Hey everyone, and welcome to my Now Bytes, a channel where I break down ServiceNow product capabilities into small, practical episodes. In today's video, we are going to look at the new ReleaseOps application introduced with the Zurich release of ServiceNow, and especially how you can extend that to handle manual deployment steps. Out of the box, ReleaseOps gives you a way to orchestrate your application deployments as pipelines with stages. That works great for fully automated CI/CD, but in reality, many deployments still require important manual activities. Things like loading data, activating scheduled jobs, or running one-off fix scripts. If you are new to ReleaseOps and want to see how it works out of the box first, my colleague John has a great demo that focuses on the standard experience. I'll link John's video down below so you can watch that either before or after this one. This episode is a companion deep dive. I'm publishing a blog post and this video together. The blog walks through the pattern in detail, and here I will show you how it looks and feels end to end. By the end of this video, you will have seen three things: what ReleaseOps pipeline looks like when those manual steps are added properly, how a deployment team experiences that pipeline during a deployment, and lastly, how to configure ReleaseOps so manual tasks sit alongside your automated deployments in a single auditable flow. Let's start by looking at the final result. Let's start in the role of a release manager. I'm navigating to the releases list in our production or controller instance, and I'm creating a new release for the upcoming deployment. There's nothing special just yet. It's the standard release form with basically no changes to it. I still need to select the destination environment, proper description. I select the free state somewhere in the future, as well as a release state. Assign the whole release to myself as the owner. Here we go with the pipeline. I previously created a new pipeline called Release Pipeline with manual tasks. We are just not looking into the details of this just yet. I'll come back to that later in this video when I show you all the details. That's it. Let's save the release record and we'll activate the release. So now the release is ready for our development team to attach their changes. Next, I switched hats and logged in as a developer in my dev environment, working in ServiceNow Studio. Let's open a custom application that I prepared, and we will use a simple business rule for this demo. So here's the business rule: log message or display message, nothing fancy, just easy. With the business rule open, notice that I'm currently working the default update set for this app. So let's first create a new update set to track our changes. I'll create that update set and we will set that as active, which will show at the status bar. With that, we are ready for our change. I do a simple change, just updating the message. It could be obviously any change to the application. Everything that we track in an update set would work, right? So let's save that change and our development work is finished. Now let's open the update set so we can complete it. With the update set completed, the system will allow us to promote the update set through the stack. So while promoting the update set, I choose to create a new deployment request, give it a title. Need to define what is my source environment. And I'll link it to the release that my release manager kindly prepared just some moments ago. We'll not choose any ATF or instance scans for now, just submit that. With the deployment request now created, I can scroll down to the bottom in the related list where we have the deployment request tasks. This is actually where ReleaseOps will track tasks like preview, testing, or scanning issues and assign it to somebody to work on. Now with the configuration I made, and we'll dive into a little later, we can also add manual tasks at the same place. So we just say new, get a new task, and I'll prepare some ideas here, just like pause a scheduled job. We can define what type of task. That's a pre-deployment task. We want to do that before we run the deployment. So we want to pause a job so we don't cause any data inconsistencies. And I'll assign that for the sake of now just to myself. Submit that. And let's add a second task as a post-deployment. Now that we paused the job, obviously we need to re-enable the same job again and say that's a post-deployment task, same thing. I'm assigning it to myself. Submit that tasks. These are some typical examples, but I guess you can imagine any kind of other task like importing data, assigning roles to users, or whatever else you need as a manual step during a deployment. Now with that all defined, I can send that deployment request on the go by clicking Ready to Assess. Now I'll switch roles again and embody a member of the operations team. Part of my job is to execute any manual tasks that ReleaseOps surfaces during a deployment. In a real world scenario, I'd probably come from a dashboard, work queue, or via notifications. But in this demo, let's start from the release record that we already know. On this one, I'll navigate down to the deployment requests, and I can see there is one ready to assess. Let's check out this request. So on this deployment request, if I scroll down to the activities section, we can see that there's a note saying waiting on deployment task for pausing scheduled job. That's exactly the pre-deployment task that we have created as a developer. I can see that task by scrolling down to the related list, deployment request task. Let's open that pre-deployment task. And here I could see all the details, the descriptions, any technical details that the developer shared with me, maybe files that need to be attached, whatever. You can flash that out as complicated or detailed as you need. For this demo here, let's assume I've already performed the action, like here pausing a scheduled job. And all I need to do, once that's done, clicking on resolve to close that task. Let's go back to the deployment request, and we can see the automation is continuing. It started now moving the update sets to platform success test, which is my test instance, which will just take a couple of minutes to complete. Now that ReleaseOps has moved my update sets to the next instance and committed them, we can see the messages of ReleaseOps, like in the standard. And we can also see that ReleaseOps is again waiting on the deployment task, our post-deployment task that the developer has specified. Same like before, we're scrolling down, we can see the post-deployment task. I'll open that one. And yeah, let's assume I did that. I re-enabled the job or whatever was specified by the developer, uploading data and so forth. And we resolved that task as well. Now moving back to the deployment request, we can see additional comments that have happened in here, like post-deployment task has been closed. We continue with the automated assessment process. There's no tests in this case, so we didn't do that. And the deployment request has changed to ready for deployment. So one more thing that happened as part of that deployment to the test environment is that at the very end, I added cloning the existing deployment tasks as a preparation for the release deployment. You can see there are two new tasks now created. Same text, same content. I copied everything over. I just marked them as release, which will allow us through the deployment to the release environment to do exactly the same, pausing before and after. Now you have seen the end-to-end flow in action. ReleaseOps coordinating an automated deployment, pausing for our pre- and post-deployment manual tasks, and then picking up again. The example was intentionally kept simple. In a realistic implementation, you'd likely add things like automatic task assignment rules, more opinionated form designs, richer validation steps, and you name it. But it should clearly convey what is possible with ReleaseOps. Now let's switch gears and look together what I had to configure to make this demo possible. So the first thing I had to change was in the deployment request task. You have seen the type field. I added the two new types, pre-deployment task and post-deployment task. This is a simple choice list change. You can just do that within the ReleaseOps scope. So with these choice values in place, I had to modify the process. For this, I created two subflows and two playbooks. Let's start with the subflows. First subflow is called wait for deployment task. This one takes as an input a deployment request and a type filter to know if I want to wait for pre or post deployment tasks, and I can use the same subflow. So this subflow basically loops over all the existing deployment request tasks for the given deployment request, figures out if they are still open or if they are closed already. If there's something still open, we update the deployment request. You have seen the message, I'm waiting on this, and then it waits for the status set to be closed. When everything is done, it just would update the record saying, I'm done waiting, you can continue. Very easy and lean. The second one is copying the deployment request tasks at the end of the assessment playbook. Similar like before, it will loop all the deployment request tasks, in this case now the ones that are completed successful. And if yes, it would copy them over to a new record, sees if there are some attachments, copies the attachments over, so we are prepared for the next stage of the deployment. Again, very easy and simple subflow act. Now the playbooks. ReleaseOps ships with two sample playbooks, the sample deployment request assessment and the sample release deployment. I used both of these, cloned them into my custom scope, and all I did is basically adding these steps, wait for manual tasks before and after the integrate deployment. And you can see here, if I go into the automation tab, in this case, I'm waiting for the post-deployment tasks. That's basically my wait conditions. And then at the very end of this process, I added this one, copy manual task for next stage, saying, hey, we'll take the same task and we copy them over for the next stage. And in this case, I put in a parameter, what is the next stage? You can customize that or change that to your needs. That's the release assessment. So that one will happen when you go from your development to your test environment, for example. And last but not least, is the release deployment assessment. Same thing basically. I copied or cloned the existing one and I added the wait for manual task before and after the release deployment. That sets up all the technical base work for ReleaseOps using that. The last step is bringing it all together. On my controller instance, which is production, I went into the pipelines features of ReleaseOps and created a new pipeline. You have seen me selecting that pipeline as release manager when crafting the release. I called that pipeline release pipeline with manual tasks. Now this pipeline basically defines what is the playbook I'm running at an assessment stage, deployment request assessment, and which playbook is run at the release deployment state. Here I'm obviously linking to the two playbooks I have created, and I put in a third instance as the test instance, and that's it. We are ready to go. All right, let's wrap this up. In this episode, we took ReleaseOps and pushed it a bit further. Instead of thinking of deployments as purely automated, we pulled our manual deployment steps into the same pipeline. You saw how a release manager creates a release with a custom pipeline, how a developer promotes an update set and defines pre- and post-deployment tasks, and how an operations team actually works those tasks while ReleaseOps automation pauses and resumes around them. Under the hood, it's still just standard ReleaseOps configuration, pipelines, deployment requests, and tasks. But by modeling your manual work explicitly, you get better visibility, cleaner handoffs between teams, and a much stronger audit trail of what really happened during a deployment. If you want to dig deeper into the pattern, check out my companion blog post linked below, where I walk you through the same example in just a little more detail. And if you haven't seen it yet, make sure you watch John's overview on ReleaseOps to get a solid understanding of the out-of-the-box experience. If you found this useful, consider subscribing to Now Bytes for more short technical dives like this. Thanks for watching and see you in the next episode.